Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Rosenberg, and I work for Student Housing and Hospitality Services at McGill University. I'd like to thank you all so much for viewing this virtual version of our keynote workshop. Life Beyond Residences is a passion project between student housing and campus life and engagement here at McGill. The goal of this workshopping event aims to provide our community with all of the basics needed to prepare for living your best life in Montreal. This presentation, Apartment Hunting 101 or Living Off Campus, will hopefully give you the ins and outs of renting in Montreal with information not only on how to find your first apartment, but how to ensure you are aware of your rights and responsibilities as future tenants. To begin, a little bit about what we're going to cover today. Also, because there's a lot of information that we're going to go through, this presentation and resources found within are all going to be available on the off-campus housing webpage for McGill University. The first thing, and probably the most fundamental for getting your apartment search underway, is to understand what the information in the advertisements you will or have been looking at mean. Every province or territory in Canada has their own distinct nomenclature, but here in Quebec, we use the closed room and a half system. This means that any room that has a door is included in the room size. When you see a 1.5, this is often referred to as a studio or bachelor, and this is where all 3 rooms are one and the bathroom is distinctly separate. A 2.5 typically has a closed kitchen, but the bedroom and living room are shared. A 1-bedroom apartment is actually a 3.5 because it has 3 distinct rooms: kitchen, living room, bedroom, and the bathroom is the half. Anything greater than a 1-bedroom increases the first number, so a 2-bedroom is actually a 4.5, 3-bedroom is a 5.5, and so on. The only true legal requirement is that your bathroom has to have a door. This is a better visual representation of the distinction of rooms. It is also vitally important then that you visit an apartment, because closed rooms do not necessarily mean door to some property owners. They might designate the separation by curtains, string beads, or other forms of partitions. Now, how much does all of this cost? Also, what determines the cost of an apartment, and how do property managers decide how much an apartment can be rented for? And more importantly, how do you, as an individual or sharing with other people, decide how much you can afford to pay? 3 major factors decide the cost that you will be paying for your rent. The first is the location. The standard in any major city is that the closer you are to the downtown and major sites, the more expensive rent becomes. In Montreal, the divide is quite simple. The closer you are to the downtown core or major universities, the more expensive rent becomes. The second major factor is utilities. These include, but are not limited to, heat, hot water, and electricity, and in some cases gas. Other utility your property owner might throw in could be internet or cable, parking, and in some rare cases, cleaning services. The third major factor is the number of people sharing. If you share your apartment, you are more likely to pay less because you'll be sharing the cost not only for the rent, but for the utilities and extras as well. The more rooms, the higher the rent, but the more you can divide that rent as well. For the most part, students at McGill tend to lead towards 2 very common building types because those are what are closest to the campus and have the most reasonable rents. Those are either apartment buildings or walk-ups. They differentiate in a variety of ways, so you should not be surprised to find them pretty well standardized. Apartment buildings tend to have studio, 1- and 2-bedroom apartments, though some do have larger spaces. They also have a higher than average rent because the additional amenities like on-site laundry, intercom security, garbage, and recycling pickup. Walk-ups tend to be available with more closed bedrooms and therefore lower rents, but do not offer the same amenities. You will more than likely be expected to pay for utilities on your own, have to bring out your own garbage, and visit a laundromat if you do not intend to buy your own machines, or if the hookups even exist. Student Services put together a great template for your budget to help plan out your first year. There really are many fiscal points to consider, some that you may need to examine based on your current spending versus when you are living on your own. Before you make any concrete plans or sign any contracts, it is always recommended to play around with your budget a few times. It's also important that anyone you might be renting with does the same. Home insurance, or personal liability insurance, can help protect your home and personal possessions in the event of damage from natural disasters, fire or water damage, and theft. In certain instances, they can also assist with additional expenses, like the temporary need to relocate if your dwelling becomes inhabitable. If you are under 26, you should find out if you're still covered by your parent or guardian's insurance, in which case it is possible for their coverage to extend to you as well. It's also important to distinguish your own personal coverage from that of your roommates so that you are not held liable for any damages that you did not incur. We'd like to assume that at this point, you might have looked over a few advertisements already, and you understand the gist of them. But maybe this is your first time living in Montreal on your own, and maybe you're used to living close to campus. So I want to try and help you navigate the city and help get you more excited. Any Montrealer, like myself, would tell you the same thing, that it is the best city in the world. Of course, any person would say that about their favorite city. Montreal, though, is in my humble opinion, not like any other city. It is beautiful, it's fun, it's charming. It mixes older European architecture with multiculturalism and remains somehow uniquely diverse. With 4 universities in one city, it was ranked the best student city by QS World University Rankings. Montreal is consistently being ranked as one of the most livable cities with high quality of life, employability, and has very reasonable housing rates, particularly in connection with similar Canadian metropolitan cities like Toronto and Vancouver. It was recently voted the most trilingual city in Canada, which means that there is nothing to fear if you do not speak French. We are happy that you have chosen to make Montreal your home, if only for the duration of your time at McGill, and we want you to know that you are most welcome here. Based on data gathered by the Canadian Urban Transit Association, Montreal was ranked #1 best public transit system in Canada. Students that are enrolled full-time at McGill are eligible for the reduced fare OPUS card through the STM, the Société de Transport de Montréal. At this point, the wheels are hopefully turning in your minds, and you're all probably starting to see the process as a cycle. So what's the next step? When do you start looking? When will apartments be available? And where's the best place to look? In Quebec, leases are renewed automatically, but if a tenant tells their property owner that they will not be renewing and have a standard 12-month lease, they need to advise them a minimum of 3 months before the end of their lease. This means most property owners start to post advertisements 2 to 3 months before their lease starts. Take a look at the schedule as a basic guideline for when you can expect to see advertisements posted on the dates you would be interested to begin renting. Here's a small snippet of terminology you might see on some of the advertising sites, posters, or Facebook ads, and what they mean both in English and French. We're going to go over them a little bit more in a moment. The majority of listings available to students are going to be recorded online. Your best bet to find available apartments would be to use reliable online listing search websites or social media sites that have moderators within larger affiliated groups. Any listing should be able to answer the following questions. What kind of dwelling is listed? Is it a house, apartment, or a room for rent? How much per month does this unit cost? When is the unit available to rent? Where is it located? What kind of lease? Is it a sublet, a lease transfer, a new lease? And then the contact information for either the property manager or co-tenant. We can't say how many apartments you'll need to visit before you find the one that is the perfect fit for you, but you should always see more than one apartment and never sign anything before thinking it over, and better yet, discussing it first with someone else. Though the advertisements would have answered some basic questions about the apartment, always come prepared with a checklist of some other questions that you can ask either the person showing you around or the property manager. A few examples would be, will the apartment be furnished or should I bring my own furniture? What does the rent include? Heat, hot water, electricity, gas, internet? What major appliances are included or not? Fridge, stove, washer, dryer? What are the amenities in the vicinity? Hospital, public transit, police, fire department, grocery stores, pharmacy? If it's a room for rent, there might be information about the other person sharing the apartment. Are they also a student? What are their ages or identifying genders, or any other factors that might be important to you? When visiting an apartment, sometimes students do not feel comfortable politely snooping about, especially if the tenant is still living in the apartment. You should, however, politely ask to view the apartment thoroughly because you really want to make sure you know what you are getting. Remember, and do not forget, you would be signing a contract, usually for 12 months, so it's always better to err on the side of prudent. Open the fridge, the freezer. Is it in good condition? Is it really dirty or frosted over? Turn on the stove and oven to make sure all of the elements work. Find out whether these appliances will be included in your rental agreement. If not, will they be replaced or are you expected to provide your own? Same thing would go for any other major appliances, including dishwashers, laundry machines, or anything else that might be included. If they are not in reasonable condition, find out if they can be cleaned or replaced prior to you moving in. There's no harm in asking. Open all the closets, even if there are things inside. Check the ceilings and walls. Are there cracks or mold in the kitchen? Open the cupboards and check under the counter for any mold that might be growing. In the bathroom, it is very important to check for mold around the bathtub or if there's any loose tiles. Flush the toilet and turn on the taps in any sinks or bathtub to make sure they work and to check the water pressure. Sometimes tenants or property managers will cover holes in the walls or discrepancies with artwork or carpets, so check these aspects as best as you can as well. As a future tenant, you want to check as many details of the apartment as you can because once you sign a lease, you cannot break it just because of something aesthetic or minor repairs. Other questions you can ask during your visit. How long have you owned or lived in the building? Are there other students in the building? Who lives above or below this unit, if any? Who should I contact in the case of an emergency or for repairs? Is there a property manager on site at all times? What level of security exists in the building? Is there an intercom, door locks, deadbolts? Is there a camera? Are any major repairs anticipated in the upcoming year? Have there been any major repairs or renovations done in the past year? Before you sign a lease with one or more people, it is important to understand the level of commitment you are getting into and the people with whom you are signing this legally binding contract. This is why we recommend you sit down and get to know your potential roommates in order to set some ground rules and to get to know each other's living habits. You might be friends, but that does not mean you should be roommates. It is important that anything that is important to you, it is spoken about, whether it is noise related, about guests, or about sharing expenses. A roommate agreement is highly recommended. It is a written agreement between cohabitors of a living space, which all parties collectively agree to be binding. Once signed, this agreement enters all participating roommates into a contract with each other, but not the property manager. You can find templates of these online, but some of the more frequently used points include the level of cleanliness, level of noise in the apartment, sleep schedules, guests, and how bills are going to be shared. Being a well-informed tenant is your best tool during your apartment search. It's important to familiarize yourself with Quebec lease regulations as they tend to differ from the rest of Canada, the United States, or internationally. A lease is a contract between a property manager and a tenant that defines their respective commitments concerning a dwelling. While certain property managers may attempt for you to sign contracts that they have drawn up themselves, it is always the best principle to request a Government of Quebec lease. You can find samples of the document on the Régie du Logement website, and leases can be purchased at most pharmacies or corner stores throughout Montreal, and they are available in both English and French. Property managers might first ask for you to complete an application. An application form is a pre-lease. Once you submit it to the property manager and they have accepted it, you are legally responsible for the space. It can be as binding as a lease. When completing an application or a lease, the property manager is permitted to request some information to ensure that the people to whom they are renting will be reliable tenants, and documentation is an inevitable part of the apartment search. Application forms, credit checks, background checks, or other contracts will be asking you for personal information. It's important to know what is required of you and what is not. For example, it is legal to ask for a reference or a credit check, to require a cosigner for students who do not have certifiable income, to ask for the first month's rent up front, or to ask for a furniture deposit if the apartment is furnished. However, it is not legal for people to ask for credit card numbers, passport numbers, bank account numbers, social insurance or social security numbers, or any information about your nationality or citizenship. They cannot ask for post-dated checks, they cannot ask for the last month's rent at the beginning of the lease, and they cannot ask for any deposit other than the first month of rent. The only legal way to get out of your lease without any financial or legal penalty is either by subletting your apartment or transferring your lease. In certain cases, such as with joint tenancy, there may be restrictions on the right to sublet or transfer. This is also the case with educational leases. A sublet applies when the person who is signed to the lease intends to vacate the unit for a short period and expects to return after their absence. A lease transfer applies if the person who is signed to the lease does not want to complete the terms of their lease or return to the unit, then the lease can be assigned to a new tenant. Once the decision to either sublet or transfer the lease has been made, the property manager needs to be notified in writing. Leases are legally binding and difficult to break, and there are very few reasons that you are permitted to do so without penalty or the need to transfer the rent to another person. These include if the apartment is not in livable condition, which has to be substantiated and has to be approved by the Régie du Logement, spousal or sexual violence, or special needs relating to long-term care or low-rent housing. An important piece of information regarding leases and roommates is the issue of joint tenancy. A joint tenant, unlike an occupant, has a verbal or written lease with the property manager. For example, all roommates have their name on the lease for the dwelling, as well as an agreement between each other regarding the terms of rent and lease. If the lease contains a clause stipulating solidarity, one of the joint tenants can be sued for the full rent. If there is no explicit clause in the lease or a clear agreement between all parties, the joint tenants are responsible. A joint tenant who is disturbed by another joint tenant's behavior or who does not respect the agreement between them, for example, does not pay their share of the rent, has legal recourse against the defaulting joint tenant. A joint tenant is someone with a written lease who rents the same dwelling with one or more tenants and is not just an occupant. Let's just quickly run through some reminders of important do's and don'ts. You do have to give a notice of non-renewal on time, that is to say, minimum of 3 to 6 months prior to the end of your lease if you have a 12-month lease. You do have to pay the agreed upon rent. You do have to use the apartment with prudence. You do have to respect the laws of safety and sanitation, and you do have to keep what's called a normal enjoyment. You do have to inform the property manager of any serious defects when you move in, and you have to remove all movable effects upon leaving. You also have to make sure that you leave the dwelling in good condition upon leaving. That is also to say that your property manager must deliver the apartment in good, clean, and habitable condition upon the agreed date. They must maintain the dwelling in good condition. They must allow for the peaceful enjoyment of the property. They must respect the laws of safety and sanitation. They must make sure that the number of occupants respects the safety and sanitation laws, and they are required to make all necessary repairs. In Quebec, you are not required to pay any amount in advance other than the first month of rent. If the property manager asks for you to pay a security deposit or for the first and last month rent, you are permitted to say no, and it should not affect your ability to rent the unit. The property manager, however, is permitted to ask for a deposit for furniture in the apartment. Tenants are also not required to pay for any deposits for their keys. However, they are responsible to pay for any loss of key or if they should break the lock. Here are a few more important tips to remember. Do make sure to go to the Régie du Logement as soon as any problems start to take place with your property manager. Make sure to take any pictures of any damages or problems that exist in your apartment. Make sure that everything is written down and in agreement between either your roommates or your property manager. And for the first few appointments, make sure to bring a witness for meetings with your property manager as well. Make sure that you do not withhold rent. Make sure that you do not make repairs and then later bill your property manager or subtract those costs from the amount of your rent, and also make sure that you do not just leave or abandon the property. As much as your personal belongings are vulnerable to theft, your personal information and finances are equally vulnerable. There are several scams that exist and plenty of people who continue to take advantage of students and people who are uninformed. Here are a few examples of some common scams. Finder's fees. This scam involves a tenant offering to secure the lease for their apartment to a given tenant in exchange for a large sum of money. This is very different from using a real estate agent, as it is often done without the knowledge or approval of the property manager. The scam is that you are not only paying large sums of money just to secure an apartment that you can get without having to do so, but the property manager is not made aware of the transaction, and they could rent out the apartment despite the money you put towards securing the space. Too good to be true. This scam involves photos or details of the dwelling being drastically better than they are in reality. This scam could be particularly devastating for people who are making the arrangement for their housing from abroad, or if there are several people who are dependent on this agreement. If you sign a lease for a property without seeing it in person or through live video, you run the risk that it will not be what you anticipated, and you will be legally bound to a property that might be unsuitable. Money before viewing. This is an extension of the scam above, wherein you can arrange for a property prior to viewing it and pay a security deposit for the first month of rent up front. When you ultimately arrive, either the property does not exist or it is not in the condition or specifications that were guaranteed, and you can ultimately be left with a substantial loss. MIA property manager. This scam that has happened in the past, where you will meet a person pretending to be a tenant or a property manager, but they actually have no affiliation with the property. They have either found an apartment they know to be empty and have broken in, or entered by a back entrance and shown the apartment as their own with the intention of having you sign a lease with them and paying a deposit up front, usually in cash. The property is then revealed to belong to someone else or legally rented out to another party, and you are left with not only no place to live, but likely out a fair amount of money as well. One of the most fundamental parts about going and living on your own for the first time is not only learning your rights and responsibilities as a tenant, but also learning how to be a good neighbor. Just as in your time in McGill University residences, the number one rule to remember is to show respect. Respect for yourself, for your roommates, and for your neighbors. Doing so will likely reduce potential issues in the future and will make your time renting more enjoyable, not to mention safe. If you're having a disagreement with a neighbor, always remember to remain calm and to visit a specialist to discuss the issue before engaging in ways that you cannot take back. If you live in a building that does not have a designated garbage room and you need to put things out on the street, remember to do so only on designated collection days, and remember to properly sort your waste from your recycling. Find out from the City of Montreal website the designated collection days in your borough and where to get recycling or compost bins. For larger items, find out when and how pickups can occur. There is no legal restriction against smoking in your dwelling, unless otherwise specified in your lease. This includes the use of cannabis and vapes. If you are a smoker and you share the apartment, it is recommended to discuss the rules on smoking in the dwelling as part of the roommate agreement. Smoking is, however, prohibited in common areas of residential buildings where there are 6 or more units. This would include, but are not limited to, lobbies, parking garages, and garbage zones. Smoking is prohibited within a meter or 9 feet radius of every door or window that opens. This does not apply if the building doors or windows are directly situated on a municipal sidewalk. Remember to keep your noise in check, not only with your roommates, but also in your building and with your neighbors in mind. If you are planning to have a large get-together with a lot of noise, it would be polite to advise your neighbors so that they are not caught off guard. Remember that in the City of Montreal, tickets can be issued for disturbing the peace at any time of the day. Now that you have found the perfect apartment, the hardest part is done. All that's left is eating and living and cleaning and so much more. To conclude this presentation on apartment hunting, I wanted to once again remind everyone of the enormous number of services that McGill University offers to support its students, particularly to those transitioning out of residences. Additionally, the City of Montreal and Province of Quebec have a number of resources readily available for its residents, and for more information on these services and more, I encourage you to download our Good Neighbor Guide from the McGill off-campus website, which includes printable checklists, timetables, and everything else we have covered here to start you on the right path to finding that perfect first apartment. For any additional information or any questions you might have, please do not hesitate to contact me at offcampus.housing@mcgill.ca.